A bobcat tied to 100 balloons floated helplessly toward its death. The video shocked everyone but for one cop. It was more than outrage. It was a chance to make things right. What started as an act of cruelty spiraled into a fight for survival, a battle against ruthless power, and a secret darker than anyone expected. When the truth comes out, lives will be on the line and the choices he makes could change everything. What unthinkable act will he risk when justice is the only way forward? Before we start, take a moment to comment your name or city. It's my way of remembering that behind each play is a real heartbeat. The crisp morning air over northern Arizona's wilderness was shattered by shocked gasps and frightened calls. A group of hikers stood frozen on a rocky outcrop, their phones raised to capture a sight that seemed too cruel to be real. Against the cloudless blue sky, a young male bobcat drifted helplessly upward, its body cruelly bound and suspended beneath 100 colorful balloons. "Oh my God, someone call for help," a woman cried out, her voice trembling as she recorded the horrifying scene. The magnificent creature twisted in desperation, its spotted coat gleaming in the morning sun as it fought against its bonds. The bobcat's golden eyes were wide with terror as the balloons carried it higher and higher above the protected wilderness. Within hours, the footage spread like wildfire across social media. News stations picked up the story, broadcasting the disturbing images nationwide. Comments flooded in expressing outrage, demanding justice, and calling for immediate action to rescue the endangered animal and punish those responsible. In his small apartment on the outskirts of town, Officer Frederick Holt sat at his kitchen table, his weathered face illuminated by the glow of his laptop screen as he watched the video for the third time. His broad shoulders tensed, and his deep-set eyes narrowed with each viewing. The coffee in his mug had long gone cold, forgotten as the familiar feeling of anger and guilt churned in his stomach. He ran a hand over his tired face, the weight of recognition settling heavily on his conscience. This wasn't just another case of animal cruelty. This had Vince Dauka's fingerprints all over it. The same man he'd let slip through his fingers years ago, when looking the other way had seemed easier than standing up to the wealthy developer's influence. "Not this time," Holt muttered, pushing back from the table with determination. He walked to his window, looking out at the mountain ranges that had once been his pride to protect. Before the demotion, before he'd learned the hard way that crossing the wrong people could cost you everything you'd worked for. The memory of his last encounter with Dauka rose unbidden in his mind. The developer's sharp features twisted in a smirk, that telling scar on his hand visible as he gestured dismissively at Holt's concerns about environmental violations. "You're a smart man, officer," Dauka had said, "smart enough to know when to focus your attention elsewhere." Holt's fist clenched at his sides. He'd been smart then, choosing his career over his conscience. The commendations on his wall meant nothing now. Not when he knew what that compromise had cost, not just to the land, but to his own self-respect. His phone buzzed with an incoming message from his superior. "Leave the balloon incident to animal control. Focus on your assigned patrols." Holt stared at the message, his jaw set in determination. The bobcat's terrified eyes flashed in his mind, a mirror of all the times he'd looked away from injustice. Not anymore. This wasn't about his career now. It was about finally doing what was right, no matter the consequences. He grabbed his jacket and keys, his decision already made. The department could demote him again, or even fire him. He was done playing it safe. That bobcat deserved justice, and Dauka needed to learn that money couldn't buy immunity forever. As he headed for his patrol car, Holt pulled up Dauka's file on his phone. The developer had been busy since their last encounter, expanding his reach across the protected lands, always staying just within the letter of the law, or at least appearing to. The balloon incident wasn't just cruelty for its own sake. It was a message, a show of power meant to intimidate environmental activists who'd been protesting his latest development plans. "Time to prove what kind of cop I really am," Holt said to himself as he started the engine. The morning sun caught his badge as he pulled out of the parking lot, and for the first time in years, he felt worthy of wearing it. This time, he would make it count. This time, he would be the officer he'd sworn to be when he first pinned on that badge. The radio crackled with routine calls and updates, but Holt's mind was already mapping out his next moves. He knew Dauka's patterns, his properties, his associates. He learned them all during those years of looking the other way. Now, that knowledge would serve a different purpose, bringing the man to justice, starting with this latest act of calculated cruelty. As he drove toward Dauka's latest development site, Holt caught sight of the search helicopters in the distance, no doubt looking for the bobcat. The sight strengthened his resolve. One way or another, he would make this right for the bobcat, for the wilderness he'd sworn to protect. And for the officer, he should have been all along. The heavy thud echoed powerfully through the canyon as the Bobcat crashed into the unforgiving rocky terrain. A collective gasp rose in unison from the gathering crowd at the rim, their phones still recording shakily as the tangle of colorful balloons drifted slowly away into the vast azure sky, now completely separated from their victim and fading like a cruel afterthought. "No way anything survived that fall," muttered one of the onlookers, shaking his head in disbelief as he lowered his phone. Others nodded in grim agreement, their voices hushed, already sharing their footage on social media as if documenting tragedy could soften its reality. Officer Frederick Holt stood silently at his patrol car, his weathered hands gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned bone white. The radio crackled sharply with his superior's direct order. "Stand down, Holt. Animal control will handle recovery in the morning. Over." Holt's deep-set eyes narrowed as he studied the steep, jagged canyon walls. The setting sun cast long shadows across the rugged landscape, painting the rocks in dramatic shades of amber and deep purple. He knew waiting until morning would be far too late. If the Bobcat had somehow survived, it needed help right now, not hours from now. "Copy that," he responded tersely, but his mind was already made up. The heavy weight of his past inaction with Dalka pressed relentlessly on his conscience, a memory that refused to fade. Not this time, not again. He grabbed his emergency medical kit from the back seat and began his dangerous descent into the canyon. The terrain was treacherous, loose shale scattered beneath his boots like glass, and thorny brush clutched greedily at his uniform. Sweat soaked through his shirt despite the cooling evening air. The canyon walls seemed to close in around him, towering and oppressive, as he carefully picked his way down, using his flashlight beam to cut through the growing darkness. Hours passed in punishing silence. His radio squawked occasionally with impatient questions about his location, which he ignored. The pale beam of his flashlight swept across the canyon floor, searching endlessly. Just when exhaustion began to set in, he caught a fleeting glimpse of movement, a slight twitch of a spotted tail. Behind a shadowed boulder, the Bobcat lay crumpled against the rock face, its once beautiful coat matted with blood and dust. Its chest rose and fell in shallow, rapid breaths, each one sounding fragile and uncertain. Golden eyes, filled with pain and fear, locked desperately onto Holt as he approached. The animal tried to raise its head, managing only a weak, defiant growl. "Easy there, friend," Holt murmured gently, slowly kneeling beside the injured creature. "I'm here to help." The Bobcat's leg was clearly broken, and numerous cuts and abrasions covered its body from the brutal impact. It somehow, against all odds, it had survived. Removing his jacket, Holt carefully fashioned a makeshift stretcher. Every single movement had to be calculated. One wrong shift could further injure the already traumatized animal. The Bobcat's growls grew weaker as Holt worked, either from utter exhaustion or from a growing, cautious understanding that this human meant no harm. With infinite care, he managed to slide the jacket under the Bobcat's trembling body. The animal's muscles tensed instinctively, but it didn't fight back. Perhaps it knew, deep down, this was its only chance for survival. Holt secured the corners of the jacket firmly, creating a sling he could carry on his back. The journey back up the canyon wall was excruciating beyond measure. Every step had to be precise, every handhold tested thoroughly before trusting his weight to it. The Bobcat's warm body pressed against his back as he climbed, its labored breathing matching the rhythm of his own struggled pants. Several times, loose rocks gave way beneath his boots, sending cascades of pebbles tumbling into the darkness below. His radio continued to demand his response. Orders to return to his post immediately crackling through the night air like accusations. Holt ignored them all. His focus remained singular. Unshakable. Get this animal to safety. His arms trembled violently with effort, and his legs burned from the unrelenting strain, but still he pressed on. Near the top, the Bobcat stirred, letting out a pain mewl that cut straight through Holt's heart like a blade. Almost there, he whispered, though whether to reassure the animal or himself, he wasn't entirely sure. The stars had emerged overhead, twinkling indifferently above. As he made the final push to the rim, emergency vehicles' flashing lights painted the scene in alternating red and blue. When he finally crested the edge, his supervisor stood waiting, face twisted in anger and disbelief. But Holt walked directly past him, straight to his patrol car where he had emergency blankets stored carefully in the trunk. "Officer Holt," his supervisor barked, voice sharp with fury. "You were explicitly ordered to stand down." Holt carefully laid the makeshift stretcher on the ground, ensuring the Bobcat was as comfortable as possible before turning slowly to face his superior. His voice was quiet, but firm when he spoke. "Some orders need to be broken, sir. I won't stand by and let another innocent creature suffer." Not again. The Bobcat's golden eyes met his once more, and in that brief but searing moment, Holt knew with certainty he had made the right choice. Whatever consequences came from his insubordination, they were worth it. This time, he had chosen to act according to his conscience rather than his orders. This time, he had done what was truly right. The gravel crunched under Holt's boots as he pulled up to the remote ranger station, a weathered wooden structure that seemed to grow straight from the red Arizona earth. His radio crackled with another ignored order to stand down, but his mind was set. As he approached the station's door, a weary woman with untamed auburn hair burst out, her sharp eyes immediately fixing on his badge with visible distress. "We don't need any more interference from law enforcement," she said, crossing her arms. "I've already got my hands full with injured wildlife from Dalka's latest development project." "I'm Officer Frederick Holt," he said, removing his hat. "I'm here about the Bobcat, Elise Garner," she replied curtly. "Wildlife rehabilitator. And if you're here to file another useless report while that animal suffers, save your breath." The sun beat down mercilessly as they sized each other up. Holt noticed the dark circles under her eyes and the way her sun-browned skin seemed stretched tight with exhaustion. She'd clearly been fighting this battle alone for too long. "I'm not here to file anything," Holt said quietly. "I'm here to help find that Bobcat, and I think it's still alive." Elise's expression flickered with surprise before hardening again. "Like you helped last time Dalka violated environmental regulations, or the time before that." The words hit Holt like physical blows. He deserved them. "You're right. I've made mistakes. Looked the other way when I shouldn't have. But this time is different. Why should I believe you?" "Because I'm going out there whether you help me or not," Holt said. "But with your expertise, that animal has a better chance of survival." Elise studied him for a long moment, her gaze penetrating. Inside the station, Holt could see medical supplies and rehabilitation equipment, evidence of someone who dedicated their life to protecting wildlife. "The canyon's treacherous," she finally said. "Flash floods carved out caves and tunnels. One wrong step and you'll break your neck. You need a guide. Are you offering?" Instead of answering, she disappeared inside the station. Moments later, she emerged with a well-worn backpack full of medical supplies and rescue equipment. "I'm not doing this for you," she said firmly. "I'm doing it for the Bobcat." "Fair enough." As they loaded supplies into Holt's truck, Elise outlined the challenges ahead. The balloon strings could have tangled in the rock formations. If it survived the fall, it's probably trapped and injured. "We'll need to move fast." Holt nodded, noting how her hands moved with practiced efficiency as she packed bandages and antiseptic. "You've done this before." "Too many times," she said grimly. "Dalka's developments have been pushing wildlife into smaller and smaller spaces. When animals get desperate, they take risks, end up hurt, or worse." She slammed the truck's tailgate, shut with more force than necessary. "And somehow he always gets away with it." The bitterness in her voice resonated with Holt's own guilt. "Not this time," he said quietly. Elise paused, one hand on the truck door. "You really mean that, don't you?" "Yes, ma'am, I do." Something shifted in her expression, not quite trust, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. She climbed into the passenger seat, pulling out a topographical map. "There's an access road that'll get us closer to where the Bobcat went down. It's rough terrain, but it'll save us time." As Holt started the engine, he glanced at Elise. She was already focused on the map, marking potential search areas with practiced precision, despite their rocky start. He could sense her professional demeanor taking over. The animal's survival mattered more than their differences. "The first hour after injury is critical," she said, not looking up. "If we find it alive, you follow my lead on medical care. No arguments." "Yes, Mum," Holt replied, steering the truck toward the canyon. The unlikely alliance was formed, built on nothing more than a shared determination to right a wrong. It wasn't much, but for now, it would have to be enough. The truck bounced along the rough access road, each jolt a reminder of the urgency of their mission. Elise continued studying the map, occasionally pointing out landmarks they'd need to watch for. The tension between them hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed into something more focused, more purposeful. "There's something you should know," Elise said suddenly. "If we find it alive but badly injured," she left the sentence unfinished. "We'll cross that bridge when we come to it," Holt replied, understanding the implication. "Right now, let's just focus on finding it." Elise nodded, and for the first time, Holt saw a glimmer of approval in her eyes. They drove on in silence, the canyon walls growing steeper around them, both knowing that somewhere in that maze of rock and shadow, a creature fought for survival, and with it, perhaps their chance at redemption. Elise's hands worked quickly but gently as she cleaned the Bobcat's wounds. The animal lay sedated on the metal examination table, its chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. Officer Holt stood nearby, passing supplies as needed, while keeping a watchful eye on their patient. The injuries aren't as bad as I feared, Elise said, her earlier hostility softening as she focused on her work. These rope burns will heal, but we'll need to document everything for evidence. Holt nodded, snapping photos with his department-issued camera. Every detail matters if we want to make charges stick against Dalka. As if responding to that name, a distant engine sound echoed through the canyon. Elise's head snapped up, her eyes meeting Holt's. That wasn't the normal sound of tourist or park vehicles. We need to move, Holt said firmly, already reaching for the medical supplies. Dalka's not going to wait for us to build a case. They quickly but carefully transferred the sedated Bobcat to a secure recovery cage. Just as they finished, the sounds grew closer, multiple vehicles now, their engines growling as they navigated the rough terrain. There's a back trail, Elise whispered, grabbing a small pack of supplies, through the canyon. We can lose them in the maze of rock formations. The sun was setting as they slipped out the rear door, casting long shadows across the red stone. Holt took point, his hand resting on his service weapon as they moved swiftly through the growing darkness. Behind them, car doors slammed and harsh voices carried on the evening air. They're searching the station, Elise breathed, pressing herself against a boulder. We need to keep moving. They picked their way through the twisting canyon passages, using natural cover whenever possible. The voices grew more distant, but new sounds replaced them. Boots on stone, the crackle of radio communications, the occasional flash of searchlights. Sweeping the canyon walls, night fell completely, turning their escape into a dangerous game of blind man's bluff. They could hear Dalka's men coordinating, trying to cut off escape routes and drive them into a trap. Holt's experience told him they were dealing with professionals, hired muscle who knew their business. A beam of light suddenly cut through the darkness ahead. Holt grabbed Elise's arm, pulling her into a narrow crevice just as the figures passed by. They held their breath, pressed together in the tight space until the footsteps faded. They're hurting us, Holt whispered, his voice barely audible. Trying to force us up into the box canyon. Elise nodded, her face pale in the starlight. There's another way, but it's risky. There's an old mining trail that cuts across the high ground. They changed direction, climbing higher into the maze of stone. The air grew colder as they ascended, their breathing labored from the elevation and tension. Below, they could see flashlight beams searching methodically through the canyon. Suddenly, a shot rang out, the sound amplified by the canyon walls. Rock chips exploded next to Holt's head as the bullet struck stone. He shoved Elise down behind an outcropping, scanning for the shooter. More shots followed, forcing them to scramble higher up the unstable slope. Loose rocks clattered down with each movement, giving away their position. They could hear their pursuers closing in, coordinating their approach through radio calls. That's when Holt noticed the trembling beneath his feet. The unstable slope, combined with the impacts of gunfire, had triggered something. A deep rumbling sound grew louder, and small stones began to cascade down around them. Rock slide, he shouted, seeing the larger boulders starting to shift above them. Without hesitation, he grabbed Elise and threw them both sideways, away from their planned escape route. They landed hard behind a solid outcropping just as the mountainside came alive. With moving stone, the roar was deafening as rocks tumbled past their position. Holt covered Elise with his body as debris rained down around them. Pain exploded in his shoulder as a rock struck him, but he maintained his protective position until the chaos subsided. When the dust settled, they found themselves trapped between the fallen rubble and a sheer cliff face. Holt tried to stand but stumbled, his injured shoulder sending waves of agony through his body. You're hurt, Elise said, steadying him with surprising strength. Her face showed genuine concern as she examined his shoulder in the dim light. I'll live, Holt grimaced, though they both knew the injury would slow them down. The slide at least bought us some time. Those men won't risk crossing that debris field in the dark. Elise helped him sit against the rock wall, her earlier distrust completely forgotten in the face of his sacrifice. Why did you do it? She asked softly. You could have let me take the hit. Holt met her gaze steadily, despite his pain, because it was the right thing to do. Sometimes that's all the reason you need. They sat in silence for a moment, listening to the distant sounds of their pursuers regrouping. The night wasn't over, but something had shifted between them. In protecting each other, they had found a trust that transcended their initial suspicions. Late evening shadows crept across the ranger station as Elise finished bandaging the Bobcat's wounds. Officer Holt's muscles ached from their narrow escape, but his mind wouldn't let him rest. Something about this whole situation didn't add up. Why would Dalka go to such extreme lengths? He muttered, more to himself than to Elise. A Bobcat tied to balloons. It's almost like he wanted everyone looking up instead of down. Elise glanced up from her work, her brow furrowed. What do you mean? Holt limped to his patrol bag and pulled out his tablet. I've been going through some old files I downloaded before leaving the station. Dowka's development company has been cited for minor violations before, but nothing stuck. His fingers moved across the screen, pulling up document after document. But look at this pattern. Elise moved closer, peering over his shoulder. The screen showed a map dotted with red markers, each representing an unexplained animal death over the past 3 years. Those locations. She gasped, her eyes widening. I've documented similar cases in my wildlife surveys. She rushed to her filing cabinet, pulling out a thick folder filled with photographs and handwritten notes. Here, dozens of dead animals found near water sources. No obvious cause of death, but they all showed similar symptoms. Holt spread the documents across an empty table. The deaths cluster round Dowka's construction sites, following the streams downstream. He pulled up another file, this one showing construction permits. Look at the timing. Each cluster of deaths follows a new development project. Elise's hands trembled as she matched her photographs to the locations on Holt's map. I knew something was wrong, but nobody would listen. The authorities said there wasn't enough evidence because they were paid not to look too closely, Holt said grimly. He clicked through more files until he found what he was looking for. A series of shipping manifests. These chemical orders don't match any legitimate construction needs. They're industrial toxins, the kind that should require special disposal permits. The reality hit them both at once. Elise sank into a chair, her face pale. He's been dumping them in the protected waterways. The balloon incident was a circus to keep everyone distracted, Holt finished. While we've all been focused on this single act of cruelty, he's been destroying entire ecosystems. The sedated Bobcat stirred slightly on the examination table, its bandaged body a living reminder of Dowka's public brutality. But now they understood it was just the tip of something far more sinister. That's why he sent men after us, Elise said, her voice hardening with anger. He's not just covering up one crime, he's protecting years of environmental destruction. Holt nodded, scrolling through more documents. The pattern goes back at least 3 years. Every time someone got close to discovering the truth, there would be some kind of public spectacle, vandalism, threats, or worse, to draw attention away from the real crime. Elise spread out her wildlife mortality reports, connecting more dots. The symptoms I documented in the dead animals, seizures, organ failure, unusual bleeding, they all match exposure to these specific chemicals. She pointed to the manifests on Holt's screen. I just never had proof of where they were coming from. Now we do, Holt said, his jaw set with determination. We have the shipping records, the death patterns, your documentation. He looked at Elise. This is enough to bring him down. Really bring him down this time. The weight of the discovery settled over them both. What had started as a mission to save one injured bobcat had unveiled years of systematic environmental destruction. The scattered pieces of evidence they'd each collected separately now formed a damning whole. A sudden noise outside made them both freeze. The sound of gravel crunching under tires echoed through the canyon. Holt quickly gathered the documents while Elise checked on the bobcat. We need to secure this evidence, Holt whispered urgently. And we need to get somewhere safe. Dowka will do anything to keep this quiet. Elise nodded, already preparing a transport carrier for their injured patient. I know somewhere we can go. A backup facility, off the grid. But we'll have to move fast. The headlights of approaching vehicles cast long shadows through the station's windows. Time was running out, but now they understood exactly what they were fighting for. This wasn't just about justice for one act of cruelty. It was about exposing years of environmental crimes that had killed countless animals and poisoned the land itself. Elise's sharp eyes narrowed as she studied the map on the computer screen. They're all following the creek system. Every single death is within half a mile of the waterways. Exactly. Holt pulled up another file, this one showing property records. And look at this. Dowka's company bought up these 3 parcels 6 months ago, right when the deaths started increasing. Elise sank into a nearby chair, her face pale in the dim light. I've been documenting these deaths for months, but I couldn't prove the connection. The labs kept saying the results were inconclusive. She ran a hand through her untamed hair, frustration evident in every movement. We're talking about dozens of animals, not just predators like our bobcat friend here, but everything from deer to small mammals. Holt leaned back, his weathered face grim. The balloon incident was meant to be shocking, to grab everyone's attention. While we're all focused on that, nobody's looking at what's happening in these creeks. We need proof, Elise said firmly, her earlier distrust of Holt forgotten in the face of this larger threat. Real, solid evidence that will stick in court. Holt nodded slowly, his mind already forming a plan. Dalka keeps his private office at that hunting lodge of his, up near Copper Creek. I've been there before, back when he trailed off. The weight of past compromises heavy in his voice. Elise studied him for a moment, seeing beyond the badge to the man struggling to right past wrongs. You don't have to explain, she said softly. What matters is what you're doing now. The lodge. Holt continued, grateful for her understanding. He's got to have records there, shipping manifests, disposal contracts, something that proves what he's been dumping in those streams. It'll be guarded, Elise pointed out. But her tone was determined rather than discouraged. 2 men usually, more when Dalka's there. Holt sketched a rough layout of the lodge on a notepad. But I know. The building. There's a service entrance on the east side, partially hidden by trees. A sudden noise outside made them both freeze. In the silence that followed, they could hear the crunch of tires on gravel. Holt moved swiftly to the window, staying in the shadows to vehicles coming up the access road. Black SUVs. Dalka's men, Elise whispered. She was already moving. Gathering essential supplies and medical records, the sedated Bobcat lay quiet in its cage, oblivious to the danger. We need to move now. Holt quickly powered down the computer, erasing their digital trail. Is there another way out? The maintenance trail behind the station. It connects to the old Forest Service road. Elise shouldered her backpack, then carefully lifted the Bobcat's cage. Help me with this. Together, they managed to transfer the cage to Elise's truck, parked behind the station. The headlights of the approaching vehicle swept the main building, just as they slipped into the darkness of the back trail. As they drove carefully through the night, it's off despite the danger. Elise glanced at Holt. You know this could cost you your badge. Some things matter more than a badge, he replied quietly. I've spent too long looking the other way, telling myself I was just following orders. Not anymore. The truck bounced over the rough trail, each jolt reminding them of their precious cargo. The injured Bobcat represented everything they were fighting for, the vulnerable creatures who couldn't defend themselves against human greed. We'll need to hide the Bobcat somewhere safe, Elise said. I know a sanctuary about 50 miles north. Then we can focus on getting those records from Dalka's lodge. Holt studied the determined set of her jaw, the fierce light in her eyes. Here was someone who understood that protecting life, all life, was worth any risk. We'll need to be careful, he said. Dalka's not just protecting his reputation anymore. If we're right about the dumping, we're threatening his entire operation. I've been careful for years, Elise responded, navigating a particularly treacherous turn. It got me nowhere. Sometimes you have to take a stand, consequences be damned. The first hints of dawn were appearing on the horizon as they formulated their plan. They would move the Bobcat to safety, gather what equipment they could, then make their move on the lodge that night. It was dangerous, possibly foolish, but they both knew it was necessary. Why did you become a wildlife rehabilitator? Holt asked during a quiet moment. Elise kept her eyes on the trail, but her voice softened. I grew up watching this land change. Every year, there were fewer animals, more buildings, more progress that left destruction in its wake. Somebody had to speak for the ones who couldn't speak for themselves. She paused. What about you? Why become a cop? To protect people. Who needed protecting? He answered honestly. Somewhere along the way, I forgot that sometimes doing the right thing means standing up to the people giving the orders. Their eyes met briefly in the growing light, a moment of perfect understanding, passing between them. Whatever came next, they would face it together. To defenders of life and justice united against corruption and greed. The moonless night cloaked Dalka's hunting lodge in deep shadows. Elise and Holt crouched behind a cluster of juniper bushes, studying the imposing log structure that loomed before them. The windows were dark, but both knew better than to assume the place was empty. Security cameras. Elise whispered, her breath visible in the cold night air. Holt pointed to the corners of the building. For that I can see, but there's a blind spot near the back door where the motion sensor's been damaged, probably from the last storm. They moved silently through the underbrush, years of outdoor experience evident in how carefully they placed each step. The gravel crunched softly beneath their boots as they reached the wooden deck that wrapped around the lodge. Holt produced a small toolkit from his jacket. Keep watch, he murmured, working on the lock. Elise positioned herself against the wall, scanning the darkness. Her heart pounded so loudly she worried it might give them away. The lock clicked open. They slipped inside, letting their eyes adjust to the interior gloom. Mounted animal heads stared down from the walls, testament to Dalka's idea of sport. Elise suppressed a shudder. His office should be upstairs, Holt said, leading the way. They moved cautiously, testing each step to avoid creaking floorboards. The air felt thick with tension, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. The office door yielded to Holt's lock-picking skills. Inside, expensive furniture gleamed dully in the beam of their flashlights. Elise went straight to the filing cabinet. While Holt accessed the computer, found something, Elise whispered after. Several tense minutes, she held up a folder stuffed with photographs and documents. Delivery schedules, chemical manifest, everything we need to prove the dumping. Holt was downloading files onto a thumb drive when the overhead lights suddenly blazed to life. They both spun around to find Vinstalka standing in the doorway, a hunting rifle trained on them. His expensive suit looked out of place at this hour, but his smile was coldly at home in the situation. "Officer Holt," he said smoothly, "I had a feeling you might pay me a visit." Two men appeared behind him, both carrying weapons. "Though I must admit, I expected you to come alone. Ms. Garner is an interesting choice of partner." Holt moved to shield Elise, but one of Dalka's men circled around, grabbing her arm roughly. She fought back, but froze when the cold muzzle of a gun pressed against her temple. "Now then," Dalka continued, "I believe you have some things that belong to me. It's over." "Dalka," Holt growled, "we have proof of everything. The dumping, the cover-up, the Bobcat incident." Dalka's second man stepped forward and, without warning, slammed the butt of his rifle into Holt's stomach. The officer doubled over, gasping. Another blow caught him across the face, sending him sprawling onto the polished floor. "Stop it," Elise shouted, struggling against her captor's grip. "You know what your problem is, Holt?" Dalka moved closer, looking down at the beaten man. "You never learned to stay in your lane. First that business last year, now this," he kicked Holt hard in the ribs. "Some people just can't be taught." Blood trickled from Holt's split lip as he tried to push himself up. Another kick sent him back down. Elise watched in horror, tears of frustration burning in her eyes. "The evidence is already uploaded." She lied desperately, trying to stop the beating. "Everyone will know what you've done by morning." Dalka turned to her, his expression amused. "Is that so? Well, then I suppose there's no harm in destroying what you've collected here." He nodded to the man holding her. "Get the folder, and check the computer." The thumb drive was confiscated, the folder of documents tossed onto Dalka's desk. He leafed through them casually, as if reviewing routine paperwork instead of evidence of his crimes. "You know what amazes me," he mused. "How people like you two think you can change anything. The world runs on money and power, not ideals and certainly not laws." He pulled a silver lighter from his pocket. "Speaking of which, I'm afraid we'll need to have a serious discussion about consequences." Holt tried to rise again, but was forced back down by a boot on his chest. Elise felt her hopes crumbling as Dalka held the folder near the lighter's flame. They had risked everything to get this evidence, and now they were powerless to prevent its destruction. "You're just going to kill us anyway," Holt managed to say through bloody lips. "So why waste time gloating? Kill you?" Dalka laughed. "That would be much too messy. No, I have something far more instructive in mind." He gestured to his men. "Bring them both downstairs. I want them to fully appreciate the price of interfering in my business." As they were roughly dragged toward the door, Elise caught Holt's eye. Despite his injuries, she saw the same determination there that had first convinced her to trust him. Whatever Dalka had planned, they weren't finished yet. But for now, they were firmly in the developer's control, being marched toward whatever cruel lesson he had in store for them. Holt's head throbbed where Dalka's men had struck him. The zip ties bit deep into his wrist, but years of training kicked in as he tested their strength. Across the lodge's study, Elise stood with her back against the wall, Dalka's gun trained on her chest. Her eyes met Holt's, filled with both fear and determination. "You really thought you could outsmart me?" Dalka paced between them, his expensive boots clicking on the hardwood floor. "A washed-up cop and a tree hugger?" He laughed, but the sound held no warmth. Holt flexed his hands behind his back, remembering his military training. The zip ties were tight, but he knew their weakness. He needed to create slack, then snap them at their weakest point. Slowly, carefully, he worked his wrist while keeping Dalka distracted. "You won't get away with this," Elise said, her voice steady despite her situation. "People already know what you've done." Dalka moved closer to her, pressing the gun under her chin. "No one knows anything, and no one will find your bodies in these canyons." The threat to Elise sparked something primal in Holt's chest. He thought of all the times he looked the other way, all the compromises that had led to this moment. Not this time, never again. With practiced movements, Holt tensed his wrist apart, creating space in the zip ties. He could feel the plastic starting to give. Years of survival training flooded back, the countless hours practicing escapes, learning to turn restraints into advantages. You know what your problem is, Holt? Dalka turned away from Elise, stepping closer. You care too much. Always did. That's why you couldn't hack it as a real cop. Holt met his gaze. Buying time. And your problem is you think money makes you untouchable, doesn't it? Dalka gestured around his trophy-filled study. Look around. I own this town. I own the police. In that moment of arrogance, Holt made his move. He snapped his wrist apart with explosive force, breaking the zip ties. Before Dalka could react, Holt launched himself forward, tackling him at the waist. The gun went flying, skittering across the floor. Elise dove for the weapon while Holt and Dalka grappled. Fist flew as they crashed into an antique desk. Papers and files scattered everywhere, the evidence they'd come for spilling across the floor. Dalka was stronger than he looked, landing a solid punch to Holt's ribs. But Holt had training and desperation on his side. He blocked the next blow and countered with a strike that sent Dalka staggering backward. Holt. Elise called out. She had the gun, but Dalka's men were pounding on the study door, trying to break in the window. Holt shouted, grabbing the scattered evidence. Go. Elise hesitated for only a second before smashing the window with the gun's grip. Cold night air rushed in as she climbed through. Holt followed, ducking just as bullets splintered the window frame. They ran into the darkness, boots crunching on pine needles. Behind them, Dalka's enraged voice carried through the night. Find them. Don't let them leave this mountain alive. The chase led them up steep terrain, lungs burning in the thin air. Flashlight beams cut through the trees behind them as Dalka's men gave pursuit. Holt grabbed Elise's hand, pulling her behind a massive boulder just as more shots rang out. We can't outrun them forever, Elise gasped, clutching the evidence to her chest. Holt peered around the rock, seeing multiple lights converging. We don't have to. We just need to reach the cliffs. I know these paths better than they do. They moved carefully now, using the darkness and terrain to their advantage. But as they approached a narrow cliff path, a figure stepped out of the shadows ahead. Dalka stood blocking their way, gun raised, face twisted with rage. End of the line, he snarled. Holt pushed Elise behind him, facing the man who represented everything he'd once ignored. All his past compromises, all his failures to act, had led to this moment. No more running. No more looking the other way. It's over, Dalka, Holt said, his voice carrying across the cliff face. The evidence is already out. You can't bury this one. The wind whipped around them as Dalka's finger tightened on the trigger. Behind him, the cliff dropped away into darkness. Above, stars wheeled in the vast Arizona sky, bearing witness to the confrontation that would finally bring justice or death. The moonlight cast long shadows across the cliff's edge. As Holt faced Dalka, wind whipped through the canyon, rustling the sparse vegetation that clung to the rocky outcrops. 20 feet below, jagged rocks waited in darkness. Dalka's expensive suit was torn and dirty now, his carefully maintained appearance finally matching the ugliness within. His eyes gleamed with the predator's focus as he circled Holt. You've been a thorn in my side long enough, Dalka snarled, his voice barely carrying over the wind. Time to finish this. He lunged forward suddenly, aiming to push Holt over the edge. But Holt's police training kicked in. He shifted his weight, redirecting Dalka's momentum. The developer stumbled, but caught himself, turning back with renewed fury. You're not walking away from this, Dalka spat. Nobody challenges me and survives. Elise watched from several yards back, clutching her phone. Her fingers flew across the screen, desperately trying to get a signal in the remote location. They needed help, and fast. Dalka charged again, this time catching Holt in the ribs with a solid punch. Holt grunted in pain but stayed upright. The leather satchel full of damning evidence swung at his side. In that moment, he saw his opportunity. With practiced precision, Holt swung the heavy satchel directly into Dalka's chest. The impact knocked the larger man backward, his expensive shoes slipping on loose gravel. Dalka's arms windmilled as he fought for balance, but gravity won. He pitched backward over the cliff's edge. At the last second, Holt's hand shot out, catching Dalka's wrist. The developer dangled over the abyss, his feet kicking uselessly in empty air. Help me. Dalka's voice cracked with genuine fear. Gone was the arrogant businessman. Now he was just a scared man facing death. Holt's muscles strained as he held Dalka's weight. This was the moment of truth. Everything he'd lost, his rank, his reputation, years of looking the other way, it all came down to this choice. He could let go. No one would blame him. It would look like an accident in the struggle, but that wasn't who he was. Not anymore. I'm not letting you fall, Holt said through gritted teeth. But you're going to face justice for what you've done. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he maintained his grip. Dalka's eyes were wide with terror and disbelief, unable to comprehend why his enemy would save him. Got it. Elise shouted from behind them. Signals through. Federal agents are on their way. The minutes that followed seemed to stretch into hours. Holt's arm burned, but he refused to let go. He could hear Dalka's ragged breathing, see the fear that had replaced his usual smug expression. Finally, the distinctive thrum of helicopter. Rotors filled the canyon. Spotlights pierced the darkness as the choppers approached. Red and blue lights from ground vehicles began appearing on the access road below. Hang on. Holt called down to Dalka. Help's almost here. The first helicopter touched down 50 yards away on a flat area, and federal agents poured out, weapons drawn. They quickly secured the scene, helping Holt pull Dalka back onto solid ground. The developer immediately had his hands cuffed behind his back. Vincent Dalka. The lead agent announced formally, "You're under arrest for environmental violations, conspiracy, attempted murder, and animal cruelty." As the agents led Dalka away, Elise approached Holt. Her eyes were bright with a mixture of relief and admiration. "You could have let him fall," she said quietly. Holt watched as Dalka was loaded into the helicopter. That's what he would have done. But we're better than that. Justice needs to be seen in the light, not hidden in darkness. The evidence they'd gathered would ensure Dalka faced the consequences of his actions. His cruel balloon stunt with the Bobcat, the illegal dumping, the attempted murder. It would all come out in court, where the public could see justice being served properly. Emergency vehicles continued arriving, their lights painting the cliff face and alternating red and blue. Holt felt the weight of the past few days finally settling on his shoulders. His body ached, but his conscience was clear. He had faced his moment of truth and chosen right. The morning sun painted the Arizona Canyon in brilliant shades of amber and gold, turning every jagged edge of stone into a living canvas. 2 full weeks had passed since Dalka's arrest, and the rugged landscape seemed to breathe easier now, as if nature itself had taken a long, unbroken sigh of relief, celebrating his long-overdue downfall. Outside the ranger station, Elise Garner carefully lifted the transport cage containing the healed Bobcat from the back of her truck, her movement steady, but reverent, almost ceremonial. Officer Frederick Holt stood nearby, his badge gleaming fresh on his restored uniform like a symbol reborn. The department had not only reinstated him, but gone further, honoring him with a commendation for uncovering Dalka's network of environmental crimes. Yet the medal in his desk drawer meant far less to him than the quiet, hard-won satisfaction of finally doing what was right, not just for the law, but for the land and the creatures that depended on it. "He's ready," Elise said softly, her eyes bright with layered emotion as she set the cage down on the gravel. The Bobcat inside was almost unrecognizable compared to the broken animal they had once rescued. Its coat now gleamed with health, catching the light and ripples of tawny fire, and its golden eyes held a fierce wildness that spoke of renewed strength and survival. "Hard to believe this is the same cat we found tangled in those balloons," Holt remarked, kneeling to peer into the cage. His voice carried a mixture of awe and disbelief. The Bobcat met his gaze steadily, showing none of the terror or trembling it had displayed during those first desperate days of its capture and pain. Elise nodded, running her fingers lightly along the edge of the cage as though offering reassurance. "One last time. The physical wounds healed faster than we expected. Sometimes," she added, her voice softening, "I think animals really do understand when humans are trying to help them. Truly help them, not just use them for their own ends. Or their own pride. Their own pride." Together, they carried the cage carefully up the winding trail to their chosen release point, a protected ridge overlooking the vast canyon system. The same winds that had once carried the Bobcat's torment through floating balloons now rustled through sage and juniper, carrying with them the sharp, clean scent of freedom. "The laboratory confirmed toxic dumping at all 7 sites we documented," Holt said as they walked, his tone steadier now, more official, but also weary. "Dalka's facing federal charges that'll keep him locked up for years, maybe decades. And the land is being placed under permanent conservation status. No more exploitation. And his so-called hunting lodge is being converted into a full wildlife rehabilitation center." Elise added, a triumphant note edging her voice. "Sometimes justice really does win. Not easily. Not quickly, but it does." They reached the release point just as the sun climbed higher, bathing the canyon walls in a crystal-clear light that made every color seem sharper, more alive. Elise set down the cage with a slow breath, steadying herself. This was always the moment she lived for, the culmination of long nights, careful tending, and endless patience, returning a healed animal to its rightful home. "Would you like to do the honors?" she asked Holt gently, gesturing to the cage. Holt shook his head with quiet finality. This one's yours. You're the one who brought him back to life. You deserve it. With practiced movements born of countless rescues, Elise unlatched the cage door. For a long moment, nothing happened. The bobcat remained still, head low, eyes sharp, assessing its surroundings with instinctual caution. Then, in a fluid, powerful motion that spoke of restored strength, it emerged from the cage and stepped onto the wild earth. The animal paused at the canyon's edge, its muscled form silhouetted against the boundless sky. It turned once, deliberately, regarding Holt and Elise with those piercing golden eyes, as if memorizing their faces, fixing them into some quiet ledger of its survival. In that shared glance was something profound, a recognition between species, a silent exchange of gratitude and respect. Then the bobcat turned sharply and bounded away, its spotted coat blending almost perfectly with the rocky terrain. They watched in reverent silence as it moved with increasing confidence, its leaps longer, its steps surer, until it became smaller and smaller, finally disappearing into the vast wilderness before them. Elise wiped a tear from her cheek, not bothering to hide her emotion. That never gets old, she whispered. No, Holt agreed quietly, it doesn't. He looked at her profile, and what he saw was no longer the distrustful activist he had first clashed with, but a partner who had fought beside him, whose fiery passion had helped rekindle his own dim sense of purpose. The morning breeze carried the scent of sage, juniper, and renewal. Below them, the protected canyon stretched endlessly to the horizon. Its wild spaces safer now because of their actions. The empty cage at their feet stood as a humble but powerful reminder of what they had accomplished together. Thank you, Holt said finally, his voice carrying weight, for helping me remember what it really means to serve and protect all life, not just human life. Elise turned to him, her expression softened with deep understanding. And thank you for proving that sometimes the system can work, but only when good people are brave enough to make it work. They stood side by side at the canyon's edge, watching the point where the bobcat had vanished into its restored freedom. The silence between them was no longer wary but comfortable now, built on shared struggle, trust, and mutual respect. In saving the bobcat, they had discovered something neither expected, a partnership forged in crisis that had slowly transformed into something deeper, a connection rooted in shared values and faith in one another. The morning stretched on, bright with promise, as nature reclaimed what was always hers. Behind them lay the evidence of justice served. Ahead stretched the eternal wild, preserved and protected for future generations. In that quiet, unbroken moment, watching the renewed land, both Holt and Elise found their own kind of freedom, the lasting peace that comes from standing firmly for what's right, no matter the cost. If this story found you at the right moment, subscribe and stay close. Tomorrow's may be the reminder you didn't know you needed.